You've probably heard stories like this before, whispered in late-night diners or shared around a campfire. Small-town legends about abandoned places. That's what the Ridley House was supposed to be. Just another spooky story. It sat on the edge of Route 9, condemned and boarded up after a fire back in the late 80s. Locals would talk about seeing lights flickering in the windows, or how the air around the property would suddenly smell like rain, even on a perfectly clear day. It was half joke, half warning, the kind of thing you don't take seriously until it's too late. I first met Eric back in 2019, long after the Ridley House had become a local myth. He was quiet, the kind of person who chooses their words carefully, like he was afraid of what they might conjure. He carried a certain weight, the kind you get when you've seen something that rearranges your understanding of the world. He'd turned down every interview request that came his way, but he agreed to talk to us. His reason was simple and chilling. He said, "Someone else needs to know what it brings back." The story begins on a crisp autumn night. Eric and two of his friends, Nate and Caleb, decided to explore the infamous Ridley House. It wasn't about ghost hunting or anything dramatic. It was just youthful curiosity, armed with cheap flashlights and phone cameras. They were just kids looking for a thrill. Inside, the house felt wrong. Time had warped the space in that unsettling way it does. Wallpaper peeled off the walls in long, sagging strips. The shapes of long-gone furniture were permanently etched into the layers of dust on the floor. But the most unnerving thing was the air. It was thick and heavy, completely still, like the entire house was holding its breath, waiting. I've watched Eric's phone footage from that night dozens of times. The first half is exactly what you'd expect. Nervous laughter, shaky camera work, the excited energy of three friends daring each other to go further into the darkness. It's almost mundane. Then, for about 30 seconds, the audio just stops, vanishes. You can see them talking, pointing, but there's absolute silence. It's as if the recording itself refused to remember what was said in that moment. When the sound returns, Eric says the temperature in the room plummeted. That's when his flashlight started to pulse. Not a flicker, but a steady, rhythmic pulse. Like a heartbeat. His friend thought the batteries were dying, but when they swapped flashlights, the new one started pulsing in the exact same rhythm. It wasn't the flashlight, it was the room. It felt like something was breathing. They didn't stay long after that, maybe 20 minutes in total. There was no dramatic climax. No door slammed shut behind them. No ghostly figure chased them out. They just left, filled with that heavy, unnerving quiet that follows a dare that went a little too far. They thought it was over. But that's the thing about the Ridley House. The real horror doesn't start inside its walls. It starts when you leave. It follows you home. That night, Eric had a nightmare. He was back in the front hallway of the house, and he could hear a distinct dripping sound. A slow, steady asterisk drip, D-R-I-P, drip. Asterisk, even though the footage they took showed the house was bone dry. He woke up in a cold sweat, only to find his dog standing at the foot of his bed, growling. Not barking. He was very specific about that. It wasn't an aggressive bark. He told me it was a warning. The dog was staring intently at the darkest corner of his room. In the days that followed, the strangeness escalated. It started with small, easily dismissible things. The faint phantom smell of smoke drifting near his windows, even though no one was burning anything. His radio, which he always left on a music station, would switch itself to crackling static in the middle of the night. Then came the shadows. They started moving in ways they shouldn't, stretching and contorting, becoming longer and darker than the objects casting them. He tried to tell his friends, Nate and Caleb, but they just laughed it off, chalking it up to a spooked imagination. At least, they did at first. The joking stopped when Nate called him a few days later, his voice trembling. He said he was hearing tapping on his bedroom wall. It started every single night at exactly 3:17 a.m. It was always 3 distinct knocks, spaced evenly apart. Asterisk knock, 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 asterisk, and it was coming from inside the wall. When I interviewed each of them separately, their stories, their timelines, they all matched up perfectly. In my line of work, you learn that consistency like that is incredibly rare, especially when dealing with traumatic events. It lends a terrifying credibility to the unbelievable. But what wasn't consistent was what they saw, or rather, what it wanted them to see. Eric described a tall, impossibly thin figure that would stand at the far end of his hallway, a silhouette so black it seemed to absorb the light around it. But Nate said what he saw was different. He said it crouched on his ceiling, like a grotesque spider, its limbs bent at unnatural angles. The third friend, Caleb, wouldn't describe it at all. He refused. He just shook his head, his eyes wide with a terror he couldn't put into words, and said, "It wanted us to notice. It wanted to be seen." Now, a psychologist might look at this and call it a shared delusion or group suggestion, a folie à trois, where fear creates a feedback loop, reinforcing a shared hallucination. It's a rational, scientific explanation, and I would have probably agreed. But then there's the photograph. It was taken by accident. Eric was fumbling with his phone, trying to close the camera app after showing his mom a picture. His thumb slipped, and it snapped a single, blurry frame. The photo shows the doorway of his living room. You can see his own dark silhouette in the foreground, but just behind him, standing in the doorway, is something else. Something that isn't shaped like a person. Its form is distorted, and the pixels around it seem to warp and bend, like the air around a scorching hot flame. We knew we had to get an expert opinion. We sent the image, the original unaltered file from Eric's phone, to a digital forensics analyst. We didn't give her any context. We just asked her to analyze the distortions. Her conclusion was baffling. She confirmed there was no double exposure, no glitch in the camera sensor, no signs of data corruption. The file was clean, sir, but she couldn't explain the warped figure. Her exact words were, "Whatever it is, the image file is treating it as part of the light source, not as a physical object in the room. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a person. According to the data, it was made of light, or an absence of it." After the encounters began, Eric and his friends became withdrawn, haunted by what they had brought back with them. Caleb moved across the country just a few months later, cutting off all contact. Nate sought help from paranormal investigators and spiritual advisors, trying anything to cleanse his home of the presence that tapped on his walls. Eric, however, just tried to live with it. He learned to sleep with the lights on, to ignore the smell of smoke and the flicker of shadows in his peripheral vision. He told me it's like living with a constant, low-level hum of dread. He knows it's still there, watching from the corners, waiting. He agreed to share his story for one reason, to warn others. The Ridley House isn't just an abandoned building. It's a place with a memory, and it latches onto those who disturb it.